Have you ever noticed that sometimes, the moment you finally start letting someone go, they come back? For weeks, or even months, you might be the one reaching out, checking your phone, wondering if they miss you, hoping they'll suddenly realize what they lost. But nothing happens. Then eventually, something changes. You stop checking their social media. You stop waiting for their name to appear on your phone. You start focusing on yourself again. And somehow, that's when they come back. A text, a like, a random message asking how you've been. And suddenly, the person you spent so long trying to hear from is standing at the door again. So why does this happen? Why does it sometimes feel like people can sense the exact moment you finally started moving on? The truth is, they probably can't magically sense it, but they can notice when your energy changes. When you stop reaching out, the silence becomes more noticeable. When you stop giving them constant attention, they lose something they may have quietly become used to having. Even if they were the one who chose to leave, they may not have expected you to actually let go. And that's when curiosity can begin. Why haven't they texted me? Have they moved on? Are they talking to someone else now? Sometimes, people don't fully realize the space you occupied in their life until that space is suddenly empty. As long as you're still there, still checking in, still making it clear that you care, they never have to wonder what life feels like without you. Your presence is guaranteed. But when you finally step back, that guarantee disappears. And for the first time, they may have to confront the possibility that you're actually gone. But there's another reason people sometimes come back. Moving on changes you. When you're desperately holding on to someone, they can often feel that. Your conversations may carry an unspoken pressure. Every message matters too much. Every delayed reply feels like a sign. And even when you try to hide it, you're emotionally waiting for them to choose you. But eventually, when you start moving forward, that pressure disappears. You're no longer trying to convince them to stay. You're no longer chasing an answer. You're no longer placing your entire happiness in their hands. And ironically, that's often when you become easier to connect with again. Because now, you're not asking them to fill a hole inside you. You're simply being yourself. But here's the most important part. Someone coming back doesn't always mean they're coming back for the right reasons. Sometimes they genuinely miss you. Sometimes they realize they made a mistake. Sometimes they finally understand what they lost. But sometimes, they just miss the attention. They miss knowing someone was always there. They miss having access to you. And those are very different things. That's why, if someone comes back after you've started moving on, the question isn't simply, do they still want me? The real question is, why are they back now? Have they changed anything? Are they taking responsibility for what happened? Are they showing consistent effort? Or did they simply notice that they were losing access to someone who once cared deeply about them? Because moving on shouldn't be a strategy to make someone come back. It should be something you do because you deserve to keep living your life, whether they return or not. And maybe that's the strange irony behind all of it. Sometimes, the moment you stop trying to force someone to choose you is the moment they finally have the space to decide for themselves. But by then, you may have finally learned that you don't need them to. And maybe that's the part nobody prepares you for. Because for so long, you may have imagined exactly what it would feel like if they came back. You pictured seeing their name appear on your phone. You imagined what you would say. Maybe you even replayed old conversations in your head, wondering what you would do differently if you were given another chance. When you're hurting, it's easy to believe that one message could change everything. That if they just came back and said, "I made a mistake," all of the pain would suddenly make sense. All of the waiting would feel worth it. But something strange can happen when you actually begin to move on. The version of you that wanted them so desperately starts to change. You begin to remember who you were before the relationship consumed so much of your thoughts. You start enjoying things again without immediately wishing they were there to experience them with you. You make plans without wondering whether they might come back and interrupt them. You can go an entire day without checking to see what they're doing. And eventually, you might realize something that once seemed impossible. You survived without them. Not perfectly, not without pain, but you survived. And once you realize that, the idea of them coming back starts to look different. Because now, you're no longer asking, how do I get them back? You're asking, would getting them back actually be good for me? And that's a question you can only really ask once you've stopped being afraid of the answer. When someone leaves, we often put them on a pedestal, especially when we didn't want the relationship to end. Our minds become incredibly selective. We remember the late-night conversations, the inside jokes, the way they made us feel at the beginning. We remember the moments when everything felt easy. And when we're lonely, those memories can become even more powerful. Because loneliness has a way of making the past look better than it really was. We don't always miss the relationship exactly as it was. Sometimes, we miss the version of it we wanted it to become. We miss the future we imagined, the trips we thought we'd take, the memories we thought we'd make, the person we believed they could become for us. And that's why someone coming back can be so emotionally dangerous. Not because they're automatically bad for you, but because their return can wake up every hope you worked so hard to put to rest. Suddenly, the future you thought you had to let go of doesn't seem completely impossible anymore. And your heart may immediately want to pick up exactly where it left off. But you have to be careful, because just because someone has returned to your life doesn't mean they've returned as the person you needed them to be. That's the difference between someone coming back and someone coming back changed. Those two things can look very similar in the beginning. Both might start with an apology. Both might say they miss you. Both might tell you they've been thinking about you. Both might even admit that leaving was difficult. But words about the past don't necessarily tell you anything about the future. If the same problems that caused the relationship to end are still there, then getting back together might simply mean repeating the same story from the beginning. And sometimes, that's the hardest truth to accept. You can love someone. They can love you. You can both miss each other. And still, the relationship might not work. Love isn't always the missing ingredient. Sometimes the problem is timing. Sometimes it's communication. Sometimes it's trust. Sometimes one person isn't emotionally ready to give the other what they need. And sometimes, no matter how badly two people wish things were different, they simply aren't capable of building the relationship they keep imagining. That's why you shouldn't let the excitement of someone returning make the decision for you. Take a breath. Don't immediately give them everything back just because they finally came looking for it. Let them show you who they are now. And just as importantly, pay attention to who you've become without them. Ask yourself, are you happier now than you were when you were constantly worried about where you stood? Do you feel more at peace? Have you stopped walking on eggshells? Have you started rebuilding parts of yourself that you lost while trying to hold the relationship together? Because if moving on has finally brought you peace, you shouldn't give that peace away simply because the person who once disrupted it has returned. And maybe that's what real moving on actually gives you. It gives you a choice. Before, you might have felt like you had no choice at all. You wanted them. They didn't want the relationship. So you waited. You hoped. You wondered if there was something you could say or do that would change their mind. But moving on changes the balance. Not because you're playing a game. Not because you're trying to make them jealous. But because your life is no longer standing still. You're no longer sitting in the exact same place where they left you, waiting for them to decide what happens next. You're moving. And if they want to come back into your life, they have to meet you where you are now, not expect you to return to where you were. That's an important distinction, because healthy reconnection isn't about pretending nothing happened. It's not about waking up one morning and deciding, okay, we're back together. Let's just forget the breakup ever happened. If something important ended, then something important has to change before beginning again. Otherwise, you're not starting a new relationship. You're simply continuing an old one after a pause. And pauses don't fix problems by themselves. Time apart can give people perspective. It can help them grow. It can help them recognize mistakes. But only if something actually happens during that time. Distance alone doesn't automatically create change. So if they come back, don't just listen to what they say they've realized. Look at what they're willing to do differently. Maybe they've learned to communicate more openly. Maybe they're finally willing to talk about the problems they used to avoid. Maybe they're taking responsibility instead of blaming you for everything. Maybe they're willing to put in consistent effort this time. Those things matter, because trust isn't rebuilt by one emotional conversation. It's rebuilt through consistency. One good week doesn't prove anything. One heartfelt apology doesn't erase everything. One late-night message saying, "I miss you," doesn't guarantee that they're ready for a healthy relationship. Real change takes time to see, and if they're truly serious about being in your life again, they won't disappear just because you don't immediately give them an answer. They'll understand that they have to earn back the trust they once had. But there's another possibility that can be even harder to recognize. Sometimes people come back, not because they want a relationship with you, but because they don't want to lose the possibility of one. They may not want to commit. They may not want to rebuild. They may not even know exactly what they want. But they also don't want to watch you completely disappear. So they reach out just enough to reopen the door. A message here, a like there. Maybe they tell you they miss you. Maybe they start flirting again. And suddenly, you're right back in the same emotional place you fought so hard to escape. You're analyzing every interaction, wondering what it means, hoping the next conversation will finally give you clarity. And that's when you have to ask yourself something difficult. Are they coming closer? Or are they just making sure you don't get too far away? Because those aren't the same thing. Someone who wants to rebuild with you moves toward you. They communicate. They make an effort. They don't leave you constantly guessing. Someone who simply wants to keep you emotionally available might do the opposite. They give you enough attention to keep hope alive, but never enough certainty to build anything real. And that can be one of the most painful places to exist, because you're not fully together, but you're not fully free either. You're stuck in between. And sometimes, moving on means recognizing that in between isn't where you're supposed to live. You deserve clarity. That doesn't mean every relationship has to be perfect. People are complicated. Feelings can be confusing. And sometimes it genuinely takes time to figure out what you want. But there's a difference between someone needing time and someone repeatedly asking you to wait while giving you no reason to believe anything will change. You don't have to punish someone for being unsure, but you also don't have to sacrifice your own life to remain available while they figure things out. You can care about them. You can understand them. You can even hope that one day things will work and still keep moving forward. Those things can exist at the same time. Moving on doesn't always mean you stop loving someone overnight. It doesn't mean you suddenly become angry. It doesn't mean you have to convince yourself that the relationship meant nothing. Sometimes moving on simply means saying, "I loved you. Maybe part of me always will. But I can't keep abandoning myself while I wait for you to decide whether you want me." And that might be the most powerful thing you ever learn after someone leaves. Because at first, moving on feels like losing. It feels like admitting defeat, like you're giving up on the person you promised yourself you'd never give up on. But eventually, you realize you're not giving up on love. You're giving up on chasing someone who isn't choosing you. And those are completely different things. You can still believe in love. You can still believe that what you had was real. You can still believe that people can change. But you don't have to put your entire life on hold waiting for proof.